The Honourable, the member for Stephenville-Port.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And it's with great pleasure I rise today to speak to this private member's resolution brought in by the member from Lab West. The member for Lab West has been very passionate about this issue as it affects many people in his district, and as acknowledged and previously stated, it certainly affects people throughout the province as a whole. So very pleased to see the member for Lab West bring this issue to the table. Just to put in context for those who might be tuning in or haven't heard around what this private member's resolution means and what it is, essentially we're putting strong lobby efforts together to look at amending some federal legislation. The federal legislation that currently takes into account the issue around Wabush mines. And I'm going to try and put that in a bit of context for everyone here. Before doing so, I also want to acknowledge the member for Conception Bay East Bell Island for his words and very passionate about the subject as well as the member for Virginia Waters Pleasantville and the member for Fairyland. Essentially, what's happening here is there's provincial law and there's federal law. And while our provincial law is quite strong when it comes to pension and pension liabilities and requirements, we do make it mandatory for all companies to submit updates on the funding of their pensions, and we require them to make special payments to their pension liabilities when there is a deficit. However, at a certain point in time, companies can fall under the federal legislation. And the federal legislation is referred to as the CCAA, the Companies Creditors Act, and a Supreme Court decision in Quebec ruled in favor of Wabush mines in this regard. Basically, it's a federal act that allows financially troubled companies opportunities to restructure their affairs. The companies would have to have over $5 million in revenue, I believe, as the member from Lab West indicated. So there's only a certain percentage of companies that can fall under this type of protection. And it allows creditors to receive some form of payment for amounts owed to them. Now, the key part in this legislation here is around the word creditors, because Wabush Mines in this particular instance has a number of creditors, as the member for Lab West outlined, and I'll refer to some of them in a moment. But the creditors are secured creditors, and that's the key piece to this federal legislation. The pensioners in this particular instance are not secured creditors. So under this current legislation, the pensioners are not covered at all. The companies on this creditor list is what's really kind of interesting and appalling. As the member for Lab West alluded to, Wabush Mines or Cliff Natural Resources being the parent company, and then there's a number of subsidiary companies as well. And under that, they're essentially paying themselves as their own creditor here. They also owe millions of dollars to other companies, be it railway companies and Bell Alliance, other payments that they didn't make. So all of these individual companies are falling under their creditor list. And when and if this is taken care of, they'll receive some form of payment. But our pensioners are not included in there at all. And thank you very much there for the member from Lab West. We're looking at hundreds of million dollars in which they owe basically themselves in this instance. Wabush Lake Railway Company Limited, Cliffs Mining Company. Now this is Cliffs Natural Resources, but Cliffs Mining Company is a creditor on this list that's owed to the tune of $200 million. I could go on and on. There's 5-6 pages of which of amounts they owe and different companies that they owe. But essentially, it's the pensioners here that have been forgotten. This particular piece of legislation is important to look at amendments here federally, because it's not just the Wabush mine pensioners that could be affected. There's other industries across the country that would fall under similar protection under CCAA, and that would have implications on pensioners of those, whether that's other mining companies in other provinces in the country, could be forestry-related instances, auto manufacturers, the list goes on and on. So people who have worked hard their entire lives contributing to their pension and now are finding themselves in a situation when there's a massive reduction of such, and we're not sure what's going to happen as we move further right now in terms of bankruptcy. So it's certainly very important that we look at having our lobby efforts now, and as alluded to with our strong colleagues in Ottawa, that's the plan right now, and certainly led by the MP for Labrador, Yvonne Jones, and her great team, which the member of Lab West has alluded to as well. And the member for Fairland and the member for Conception Bay East Bell Island spoke specifically to personal connections as well. And you know, I don't have any personal connections. I do have friends that I've heard of that have friends and this sort of thing with respect to being directly affected here. But I guess the overall picture is this is a great time where our side of the House and the opposition can work together in this lobby effort, because we're all recognizing that it affects everybody. So whether or not it affects my district or the member for Virginia Waters Pleasantville District, that's not the important piece here. The thing is it affects everybody that has a vested interest in this pension plan, and certainly the future implications of such in other pension plan issues. So certainly something very important, and I'm glad that we can all stand and work together on this. You know, the people in the mining industry are some of the toughest people you'll find. The conditions that they expose themselves to in mining, the dangers of such, the physical tolls it takes on their bodies. I mean, they're some of the hardest working Newfoundland and Labradorians in our resource industry that we have out there. And knowing that they labored for years and years and made pension contributions, and now they're in a position where this could be taken away from them and has already been cut, and the member for Fairland referenced some direct impacts. It's not acceptable. It's not acceptable at all. Not acceptable in 2016. How a federal law and a court ruling in Quebec from the Supreme Court can essentially undermine the entire process of all those people who work so very hard. So, you know, I'm not going to belabor the issue too much further. I know the third party will certainly get a chance to speak to this, and I believe we'll be looking at another speaker on our side before we conclude debate. But overall, again, this is essentially a resolution where we have a strong lobby effort to our colleagues in Ottawa, and all sides are going to be working hard on this to ensure that the pensioners of Wabush mines have their fair share. And again, I can't stress enough the importance and the implication it has on a number of industries, and not just in Newfoundland and Labrador, but certainly across the country as well. And with that, before I conclude, sorry, just to acknowledge the amendment that was put forward by the official opposition, and certainly a great amendment, and we've acknowledged we'll certainly be supporting that. Just in extension to our lobby efforts, any decisions made would be urged to be retroactive as well. So I'd like to thank very much the member for Lab West for putting this private member's resolution forward. Certainly appreciate the cooperation from the opposition, and we'll look forward to cooperation from the third party as well. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker.